Hello and welcome to Dear Dungeon Presents Spellbook by the Letters, a brand new series here to help you learn your spells in D&D 5th edition. To get this series started, I want to give a little overview on exactly what it's going to be. I will be going over every single spell in the D&D 5th edition Player's Handbook, doing deep dives on each one. I'm going to talk about the spell's usefulness. I'm going to talk about the components of it and maybe some flavorful ways to integrate that into your game. I'm going to talk about maybe some creative uses of the spells, and I'm going to talk about who should be casting it. Because even though it might be on your class's spell list, not all spells were made for all characters to cast. And what kind of caster you are, and how many levels of spells you have, and what other spells are competing at those options, definitely have an effect on whether or not it's your character that should be using that spell. Expect advice for DMs as well on using some of the harder to use spells, or some spells that might seem game breaking at first blush if you don't realize certain things about them. I have decided that if I do 7 spells per episode, and we release one episode per week on Fridays like today, we will get the entire spellbook knocked out in over just 1 year. 52 weeks of lectures by me on the spells in the Player's Handbook. Since the name is Spellbook by the Letters, we will just be going by the letters. So, grab a pen, grab some papers. Class is in session, friends. Alright, so, you've got a little bit of homework to do before we get started. I'm not going to read the entire Player's Handbook to you. I'm going to already be reading a lot of the spells. What you need to do, pause the video right now, grab your Player's Handbook, and go to this section right here, Part 3. And just read what is a spell, spell levels, cantrips, casting, and components, and then durations, and shapes. It seems like a lot, but if you read this introduction on spells, then you're going to have yourself a pretty good idea of what we're talking about. Alright, you've got your homework done. Let's get started. Spell number 1. The first spell that we're going to be talking about today is Acid Splash. It's a conjuration cantrip with a 1-action casting time, 60 feet of range, verbal and somatic components, and it has a duration of instantaneous, which means that it happens immediately, there's no lasting effect, besides, of course, the damage that you do to them. Acid Splash's text reads thus: you hurl a bubble of acid. Choose 1 creature within range, or choose 2 creatures within range that are within 5 feet of each other. The target must succeed on a dexterity saving throw, or take 1d6 acid damage. The spell's damage increases by 1d6 when you reach 5th level. It increases to 2d6. 11th level, it's 3d6, and 17th level, it's 4d6. So, this is a cantrip that is on the Sorcerer Wizard spell list. So, let's dive right into the components. First, it has components of vocal and somatic. So you could say some component like, I call forth acid from the breath of the earth to consume and devour my enemies. And probably 6 seconds, YouTube, you can check that. But I like the idea for your vocal and somatic components for you're literally just pulling out vials of acid and throwing them at people going, "Nyeh." And as a DM, I would allow that for vocal and somatic components. Let's talk about usefulness. I'm not a huge fan. For one, it is a saving throw based cantrip versus a cantrip that requires an attack roll, meaning 1, it cannot crit, which small thing, but 2, you're much more likely to hit with an attack roll in the average case scenario than you are to have them fail a save. Now, that does not completely discount the spell. However, you also run into the problem that As a sorcerer or wizard, you have a lot of options for damaging cantrip, and this has to compete against all of those. And the damage output is middling at best at a d6. Sorcerer or wizard cantrips generally can hit a d8 or a d10 for the damage. D8, it often having an additional effect. So doing a d6 for the off chance to hit 2 people in the spell, which only brings up its damage to 2d6, and that's split across 2 targets, and it's better to focus fire in most situations. A dead enemy can't do damage to them, so you take them down one by one, you don't leave them all up. I just don't like this cantrip. I think you have much better options to choose as a sorcerer or a wizard, and 9 times out of 10, I find myself edging this out. Who should be casting it? Really no one. You should not pick up this spell. The one usefulness that I could change that is if you run a lot of dungeon campaigns and you're in close quarters a lot. If you know you're going to be in close quarters a lot and you're often making use of this, you might be able to get some use out of this cantrip. Otherwise, I'm not a fan. Aid is a cleric paladin spell. It's a 2nd level abjuration. It has a casting time of 1 action, a range of 30 feet, and requires vocal, somatic, and material components, the material components being a strip of white cloth. The duration is 8 hours. The spell bolsters your allies with toughness and resolve. Choose up to 3 creatures within range. Each target's hit point maximum and current hit points increase by 5 for the duration. At higher levels, when you cast this spell, using a spell slot of 3rd level or higher, a target's hit points increase an additional 5 for each slot above the 2nd. So, there are several things to unpack with Aid that might not be obvious at first glance, and we're going to get into those after we get into the material components. A tiny strip of white cloth. I love this because it's like you're doing a little bandage to make sure that they're hardier, and I think that that's really just that's the somatic of. And for verbal components, I'd go with something like, "My allies, let me bolster you to weather the difficult times ahead." Something kind of heroic and that really makes them feel bolstered in their heart, as well as in their body. Do I like this spell? I like this spell a lot, but I think that I like it too much for its usefulness. A 2nd level spell, you're getting 15 extra hit points. That's about on par with a 2nd level casting of Cure Light Wounds in terms of hit points created. However, Cure Light Wounds is terribly inefficient, especially when upcast. The advantage that this brings, though, is that it doesn't just heal. It increases your hit point maximum. You shouldn't be using Aid in combat unless it is a last-minute ditch effort that you have several people down, you just need to get a breath of second wind, bring some people up for a last stand. But if you're using it beforehand, giving your allies an extra 5 hit points each doesn't sound like a lot, but that's on average an extra hit they might be able to take. Where this spell, you have to look at it though, is at the higher levels cast. I've heard some DMs that rule it as, at the higher levels cast, a single target's hit points increase by 5. So, 2nd level, 3 targets each get 5 extra hit points. 3rd level, 1 target gets 10 extra hit points, and 2 targets get 5 extra hit points. 4th level, either 1 target gets 15 and 2 get 5, 2 get 10, 1 gets 5. If your DM rolls it like that, never upcast it. It's terrible. However, that is a invalid reading of the spell. It says when you cast the spell using a spell slot of 3rd level or higher, a target's hit points increase by an additional 5. So you have 3 targets in the spell. All of the target's hit points are going to increase by an additional 5. If it didn't work this way, the spell would be absolutely terrible to upcast, and there would be no reason to ever do it. With the way that it works, it's a decent upcast. At 3rd level casting, you get 10 extra hit points. That's 30 hit points for your allies, compared to something like Aura of Vitality, 10d6 worth of healing at 3rd level, which averages it out to about 30, 35. So we're about on par. Aid, I really like it as a pre-buff spell. Who should be casting it? Definitely not the paladin. This is a cleric spell, and for a friend of mine that imported the oracle, it was an awesome oracle spell. 9 levels of casting, awesome. As a cleric, when you have a 2nd level slot that you might want to burn, this is a great pre-buff. Not going to be amazing, but the fact that you can pre-buff it and it doesn't require concentration, there's value in that, and that value needs to be seen. Bonus points if you have a higher charisma and you take the Inspiring Leader feat, or you have somebody in your party that has a higher charisma and takes the Inspiring Leader feat. These do stack, because if you read Aid, it does not give temporary hit points, and that is a very important distinction. It gives additional actual hit points for 8 hours. So it stacks with anything that gives temporary hit points, whereas temporary hit points don't stack with themselves. So combining that with Inspiring Leader, which will give your party like 6 to 10 to 20 temporary hit points per short rest, and then 8 on top of that, you can take a really middling to squishy party and make them pretty hardy in the hit point department, allowing them to maybe survive a 3rd level fireball at a lower level than they normally would be, even if they fail to save. So it's one of those spells that getting those hit points up is really, really good, and I'm rambling and I'm going to move on. Spell number 3, Alarm. Alarm is a ranger wizard spell. It is a 1st level abjuration with the ritual tag. You can cast it in a minute. The range is 30 feet. And the components are vocal, somatic, and material with a tiny bell and a piece of silver wire. And Alarm lasts for 8 hours. The text of Alarm reads thus. You set an alarm against unwanted intrusion. Choose a door, window, or an area within range that is no larger than a 20-foot cube. Until the spell ends, an alarm alerts you whenever a tiny or larger creature touches or enters the warded area. When you cast the spell, you can designate creatures that won't set off the alarm. You can also choose whether the alarm is mental or audible. A mental alarm alerts you with a ping in your mind if you are within a mile. This ping awakens you if you are sleeping. An audible alarm produces the sound of a handbell for 10 seconds within 60 feet. Unless you have something very, very wrong with you, this will also awake you. This is pretty good. For one thing, so rangers and wizards get it. I think the important thing we'll actually get into that when we talk about who should be casting it. For the components, I actually like the idea. It's a 1 minute. I like the somatic components being you're actually going out and you're tracing in the air the alarmed area for your somatic components. Your material components are obvious, and then your vocal, I think just small incantations of protection, like protect this place, ward this place. Let me hear any intrusion and to be on my guard. Do I like this spell? I do. In certain situations. It's a great low-level spell to give yourself a little extra insurance along with setting a watch. Always still set a watch. Do not rely on alarm for your watches. If you don't set a watch and you rely only on alarm, that's just asking for a wizard to sneak in through another area, or somebody who's detected the alarm to find another area or another point of entry, or to disable the alarm. Alarms can be disabled with the Dispel Magic, and if you're going to get caught, you might get caught. It'll protect you in most situations, but you prepare for the worst as a wizard, and that's who should be casting it. We'll get into that. But as a supplement to a watch, to make sure that you see the threat and that you aren't caught asleep, it's really, really good. But it's not good for a ranger. As a ranger, you have very few spell slots, and giving one of your 2 or 3 first level spell slots that are generally used to cast Hunter's Mark to cast Alarm, that feels bad. As a wizard who can ritual it, because rangers don't have the ritual casting feature, as a wizard who can ritual it, that's a lot better. You can just have this in your spellbook. You never even have to prepare it. You can just have it in your spellbook. You're going to bunk up for the night. You alarm the shit out of everything. Because it's a ritual, you can cast it as many times as 10 minutes will get you. Sorry, 11 minutes can get you. alarm this, alarm that, alarm the door, alarm every window. If you take an hour before bed to alarm everything, you're good. And as for whether I would select the bell or the mental alarm, the bell's really good, but the mental alarm will for sure wake you. Something to keep in mind, something I've never tried, but something you might be able to get away with, is it technically says it will wake you if you are sleeping. You might be able to cheese your DM if you set up an alarm, if you know you're going into a place where you're going to be fighting against magical sleep. Set up an alarm, and you then have the fight there. Every single time that anybody passes through the warded area, if you're asleep, it will wake you up. This is some cheese, and it requires a lot of setup. I would never count on this strategy, but it's something clever that you might be able to get away with once. Very cheesy, but something cute. Our next spell that we're going to talk about is Alter Self. Alter Self is a sorcerer wizard spell. It has a second level transmutation with a casting time of 1 action and a range of self. You can only cast this on yourself, as per the name. Components of vocal and somatic, and duration of concentration up to an hour. So it is our first concentration spell. You assume a different form when you cast the spell. Choose one of the following options, which the spell will last for the duration. While the spell lasts, you can end an option as an action to gain the benefits of a different one. So you get Aquatic Adaptation, which gives you lungs and a swim speed, or it gives you gills and a swim speed. You get Change Appearance, which will essentially let you change yourself into something similar. So you've got to be similar size and same general shape. So if you're a bipedal humanoid, you can only transform into bipedal humanoids. If you're a medium creature, you can only transform into other medium creatures. I would consider allowing a gnome or a halfling to be like a bigger, more medium race. Like, oh, this halfling can transform into a dwarf with this spell. By the rules, you can't. That is something I would allow at my table, though. The third option is Natural Weapons, which gives you the ability to grow a natural weapon. It is a magic weapon, which is something to call out. And you get a +1 bonus to attack and damage rolls made using it. So let's talk about the components. You're going to go... That's going to be your vocal components, and you're going to spin around like a transforming superhero like Wonder Woman. And boom, Alter Self. That are your components. Let's talk about if I like this spell. I don't. I've never liked this spell. It just... If it wasn't concentration, I would think this spell is awesome, but at concentration, if you're in an underwater environment, I don't like putting my ability to not die underwater in the hands of a concentration spell when water breathing is 1 level up and hits multiple people and lasts a lot longer. You don't get a swim speed, but again, I don't like putting my ability to not die underwater in the hands of a concentration spell. The change appearance is fine. It lasts an hour. It's going to give you some tactile sense, and I think that's where the best value of the spell is in social encounters. You just kind of, like Disguise Self, have to keep yourself going at an hour at a time and be mindful of your time and be ready to re-up the spell or get out when your disguise is gone. And then the natural weapons, unless you have Paladin Sorcerer multi-class that wants to use natural weapons, I really don't see myself using that option unless it's, we need a magic weapon, they're resistant to all of my cantrips, I'm the only person that can do this, then I might put myself into melee as a sorcerer or a wizard, a d6 hit die that generally does not have a high strength to begin with. Probably build around this spell, but being concentration, why would you? It's really, really subpar for that part. That being said, just because I don't like this spell doesn't mean it's not good. Like I said, it's a personal thing. I don't like putting my ability to breathe underwater in the hands of concentration. I never trust it. I don't trust it at all. The change appearance is all right. If you're going for a political intrigue campaign or a campaign where you're doing a lot more of the social side, I think Alter Self is really, really great for that mode. It's the other two modes that I'm just not a huge fan of. As a sorcerer, I've seen it done to great effect. Still not a fan. As a wizard, at least you can swap it out and you pull it when you need it. But as a sorcerer, you will be better at selling your disguise having a higher charisma. I rate this spell as fine. In the right campaign, it can work. It's not going to be a powerhouse. Now we get to jump into the 3 animal spells, and these are going to be the last 3 that we're going to be talking about in today's lesson. The first animal spell in the book is Animal Friendship. Animal Friendship is a first level enchantment spell on the Bard, Druid, and Ranger spells. A spell list. It has a range of 30 feet, vocal, somatic, and material components. The material component is a morsel of food. Like, duh, you're offering them some food. And it has a duration of 24 hours. This spell lets you convince a beast that you mean it no harm, and you can just be like, hey, beast, intelligence 4 or lower, come be my friend. And then if it fails a wisdom saving throw, generally they're not great at it. They're probably adding 0, maybe -1 + 1. If they fail, they're your friend. But if your friends harm it, they're not your friend. If you upcast it, you can target additional beasts. Components. Obviously, pull out food. Come here. Come here, friend. Come here. Done. Those gotta be the components. If they're not, what are you doing in your game? Rating. I don't like this spell. It's very narrow. 9 times out of 10, you're not going to pick it up. But if you're playing a wilderness campaign, this spell kicks ass. Like, seriously, you're going to be fighting a lot of beasties in a wilderness campaign. This spell is going to turn those beasties to your side. After 24 hours, what do you do with them? I don't know. Maybe you just, at 12 hours, go off, be free. We don't want you here anymore. We don't need you. Goodbye. And you get to do that every session, much to, like, the dismay of the rest of your party. So, on that note, I do like this spell. But no, it's so narrow. As a bard, unless you know 100%, like, you're going to just be doing wisdom campaigns, I wouldn't pick this up. It comes on the instrument of the bards. If you get one where the charm is disadvantaged and this spell's really good for you, you already have the spell on your instrument. Taking up one of your spell slots, or your spells known, that's brutal. You don't get that many. Or for druids and rangers, it's okay on rangers. Again, though, taking up one of your spells known, you get a little bit of utility with rangers. But I would rather pick up like a Purify Food and Drink for the Wilderness campaign, in case you need to contrast Hunter's Mark with Eating, or Goodberry to contrast Hunter's Mark with Eating. But it's, you do you. If you're already playing a ranger, it better be in a wilderness campaign, so in that situation, rangers should pick it up maybe. And druids, you have more spells, you're a prepared caster, so you can have that spell prepared in case you need it, but if you find you're going into areas where there's not as many beasts, you can unprepare it. This is one of those narrow spells, and this is going to be a recurring theme in this series of lessons, is narrow spells are bad on casters that have a known spell list, and they cast off their spells known, but they're great on prepared casters, where you can prepare that spell on days that you think that you're going to need it, and you can prepare other more important, better things on days that you think that you won't. This is one of those spells. Animal Messenger is a Bard, Druid, Ranger spell, 2nd level enchantment ritual. It has a range of 30 feet. It also has components of VSM and a morsel of food. And it has a duration of 24 hours, much like Animal Friendship does. So this spell, you choose a tiny beast that you can see within range, and you're like, hey, friend, you're gonna go to a place that I've been, and you give them a general description. such as a man or woman dressed in uniform of the town guard or a red dwarf wearing a pointed hat. You can't name a person, you can only give them a description, but you can be precise in your description. And you can speak a message of up to 25 words. The target beast travels for the duration of the spell towards the specified location, covering about 50 miles per 24 hours for a flying messenger or 25 miles for other animals. So within 25 miles or 50 miles is about all you can get, because remember, the duration is only 24 hours, so anything beyond that's not going to happen. When the messenger arrives, it delivers your message to the creature, replacing its own voice with the sound of your voice. And if the messenger doesn't reach the direction before the spell ends, it's just, this message is lost. The creature slowly makes its way back to wherever it was sent off on this, and then resumes its life. And then if you cast a spell using a spell slot of 3rd level or higher, it increases the duration by 48 hours for each level slot above the 2nd. I really like the flavor of this spell. I think it's great. It's fun. You're like, hey, animal, go do this thing. It's one, it gets outclassed for the bard with sending. Add a 3rd level spell to instantaneously get your message to the exact creature that you're thinking of and have them be able to reply. Same message length. So for the bard, 3rd level spells are your bread and butter, but sending's a real good one if you need it. For the druid and the ranger that don't have that option, maybe. But it's very narrow. So for the ranger, I don't like that. Giving up a 2nd level spell, which you don't get very many of. Remember, you're not a full caster. For the druid, yes, I love this. It's a ritual spell, which means you can prepare it, cast it as many times as you need to, which isn't going to be many. How many animal messages do you really need to send? And how many animals are you going to take to do your bidding to do this? But it is a ritual spell, so it won't eat up your spell slots. That is one very good thing about that oversending. If you're playing in a campaign where you absolutely need to get a message in, this spell's going to come save your ass as a druid. And for that reason, I think it's really good. It's something you can say, oh, we're going to need to get a message to town, we're not going to make it there, or we have to go this other direction. Send the animal messenger. But again, for the bard and the ranger, justifying one of your spells known is really, really, really tough for me. If you're a bard, only if you're in a campaign where you go out into the wilderness a lot and have to send messages back to town, consider it. Otherwise, skip over it. And the final spell that we're going to be talking about today is a doozy, so buckle up. We're talking about Animal Shapes, the 8th level Transmutation Druid spell. It has a casting time of 1 action, a range of 30 feet, components of vocal and somatic, and the duration is concentration up to 24 hours. So this is a long spell. I'm not going to read all of it. I'm going to summarize. You choose any number of willing creatures that you can see within the range of 30 feet, and all of you transform into a larger, smaller beast with a challenge rating of 4 or lower. On subsequent turns, you can take your action to transform the affected creatures into new forms. The transformation lasts for the duration, or until each target drops to 0 hit point and dies. Or dies. Drops to 0 hit points or dies. So a death effect kills them, they're just dead. If they're reduced by damage, they drop to 0 hit points, they're out of Animal Shapes. Animal Shapes leaves them. So it reads like Wild Shape. It's essentially you're giving CR4 or lower Wild Shape to all of your companions. And during this spell, you can re-up the forms, essentially. They retain Wisdom, Intelligence, and Charisma, which is an important call-out. They are not dumb. They have that. They cannot cast spell. They cannot benefit from their gear. It all melds into them. You're also limited by your form, obviously. Okay, so this is a 8th level spell. We're not going to talk about who should be casting it. Druids should be casting it. Components. You're going to Ginyu Force pose. Always. Done. Do I like this spell? do. It's maybe not my favorite spell or the best spell, but it's super flavorful and freaking dope. We're going to talk about some of the forms in a moment, because there's less good ones than you think. But this does have to compete with spells like Tsunami, Feeble Mind, and Control Weather. So like some giant AoE, some heavy single target murder, and something like Control Weather, which is also awesome. That's all competing at this slot. Luckily, you can do different things each day. So that's where prepared casting comes in really handy. So you do have to factor that into account. I'm not saying any of those are better. I actually don't like Feeble Mind. But let's talk about the forms. To get the most bang for your buck in terms of like fighting utility, Elephant is the only CR4 beast. So, besides the Stegosaurus and Volos. Both do similar damage, but the Stegosaurus has a slightly lower to hit, but it gets all of its damage off without a charge, unlike the Elephant, which needs 2 attacks on a charge, and the first one has to hit. Otherwise, you don't get it. But both of those are pretty beefy options, having 78 hit points. So even at the higher levels that you're casting this at, like, you might get dropped out of form in Elephant form in one round, but not always. This is going to help you weather some blasts. Lower at CR3, you have the Killer Whale for a aquatic-based creature if you've got to do stuff underwater. Transforming the party into killer whales isn't a bad way to do it. And then for flight at CR2, you have the Giant Eagle. This is pretty much a non-combat form at this level, but if you need the entire group to get 24 hours of flight to just mount up with eagle wings and go, this spell does it for you. And the thing about the Killer Whale is you do have to surface every 30 minutes. If you cannot do that, you actually have to jump down to CR2 for the Hunter Shark. And at this level, not a great combat form. But if it's breathing underwater and for some reason you don't have water breathing, which you're a druid, so you should have it. But if you need a swim speed and for some reason you can't get the swim speed, this will do that for you in a pinch. And that's where I think that the true, like, goodness of this spell really shines. Because for a combat thing, it's alright. It doesn't give you magic weapons, so only the druid is going to actually be able to, like, cut through enemies that are immune to magic weapons, or immune to non-magical weapons, or resistant to non-magical weapons, which at this level is a lot. So that's got to be taken into account. And you are taking only CR4 forms on, which, at the level that a druid can cast this, you are going to be more powerful than those forms. These do give you a nice buffer of hit points, though. And it's a buffer of hit points that can be refreshed every round. So technically, if you're wanting to do like some Scorched Earth style like campaigns against a bunch of smaller monsters, Druid can make everybody into elephants. Go hide somewhere else, because there's no range on the changing of forms. Once the spell is cast, you can be a mile away. The Druid goes and hides to maintain concentration, because if you get knocked out of concentration, you're dicked. And then the party goes through, and then every 6 seconds, elephant form. Every 6 seconds, elephant form. Every 6 seconds, elephant form. And your party gets brought back up to full health elephant form every 6 seconds. Now that is a recipe for some carnage and chaos. There's also some other really cool forms that you can take with this. That you might not be thinking of. If you're playing a subterfuge campaign, you need the Cranium Rat from Volo's Guides to Monsters is this really underrated little form that turning your entire party into Cranium Rats is amazing. You're incredibly weak. They're CR 0. Okay, so don't expect to take a lot of damage. But you get 30-foot telepathy on a rat creature that looks kind of scary. So it is like, oh, what's that? But you get 30 feet of telepathy on a stealthy little rat creature. And you also get the ability to shirk off all divination spells, ability to read your thoughts, or any of that nonsense. So you need to go into hiding. Entire party becomes Cranium Rats. You cannot be divine. You cannot be found. You get the fuck out. So that's another great option. And so, like, that's where this spell really shines, is its utility. It's got a breadth of options, and none of them are going to be the most powerful thing that they can do, that you can do at that level, but all of them are going to be useful, and you're going to be able to find a use. So kind of like I was saying, Alter Self, I don't like that spell because I think some of them are just bad. And, like, I don't like putting my ability to survive underwater at concentration, and that goes for this. But getting your entire party in it at an 8th level spell for 24 hours, I'm a bit more likely to do it, even if it costs me a much higher level slot. So, I don't know, maybe it's a little bit hypocritical, maybe my evaluations are completely off, but I like this spell a lot better than I like the other. This was long. This went a lot longer than I thought it was going to be. I'm apparently teaching a Wizard 101 course or something now. I don't know. But if for half an hour a week you want to join me here, I would love to talk about the magic system. I freaking love magics. I love spells in D&D. I love playing a caster, and I would like to share that with all of you. I'm going to look at ways to shorten up and streamline this, because this is going to be a lot of content to get through. But stick with me, and I promise that it's going to be really fun. I want to give a huge thank you to our mother podcast to this show, Dear Dungeon, the one that's presenting this. It's an advice show that I run with one of my very dear friends, Audrey. And me and her, we answer user-submitted questions on tabletop role-playing games. You can find them on iTunes, you can find it on your local podcast app, anywhere that you want to be, you can find that. We've got a year and a half worth of content, and we're always looking for more questions. We're always looking for more listener feedback. You like what I do, go follow me on Twitter. I don't post there a ton, but I'm trying to get better at it. My handle is @TheLostSamurai7, and I'll see you there. And I want to give a call out, and I'm going to do this at the end of every episode, to a piece of media that either I personally really like a YouTube channel or a product line or something, but more often than not, it's going to be something that my friends are doing, because I have some of the most talented friends in the world, and I'm super thankful for them. So I want to rep them. I want to let you know about them. And this first one's got to be to one of the most amazing projects that I've ever seen. Like I said, my aforementioned dear friend Audrey, who does Dear Dungeon with me, and another one of my best friends, Ben Quiggins. Both of them worked together for over a year on creating a 5th edition sci-fi supplement. Not a 5th edition sci-fi conversion, almost. It's amazing. It's almost 400 pages of content on how to run a 5e game of sci-fi. So it's all of the familiar base mechanics, but updated for space, and it's super cool. They've got their own setting in there. They've got new classes. You can pick it up on DriveThruRPG for only $20, and it's well worth it. Please, so if you like sci-fi at all and you like the mechanics of 5th edition, go check it out. You won't be disappointed. But class is dismissed. I'll see you next week.